Oh, Richard. Hey, welcome. We're going to kick into things, yeah. The important stuff. No, it's great that you come all the way down here and join us. We've got heaps that we can share, no doubt. So, yeah, we understand that this is a special opportunity for our council. So, yeah, we greatly appreciate that. And we had a great day together yesterday as well, looking at package and quite a bit on Freshwater, but we looked at other aspects as well. So yeah, well, I'm not going to talk for a long time. We have got obviously quite a bit of experience in previous legislation and how that works and some of the challenges around it as well. So hopefully we can gain some good out of this. Lloyd, Lloyd is deputy chair, but he also often chairs the strategy and policy meeting. So he chaired yesterday's one. So yeah, I'm chair, but Lloyd generally does this stuff. So yeah, between us anyway, we'll keep it fairly laid back and yeah, just a good chance to have a good chat. So shall I hand over to you, or shall we go around the room? We sort of got a quick rapid fire look at who we are, but we could say where we come from. Might be useful. And you could introduce yourselves as well. So you probably know Fleur, but shall we start with Fleur?
All right, yeah, kia ora. I'm Fleur Matthews and I'm the manager of policy and planning at Otago Regional Council.
Kia ora, Richard Saunders, I'm the chief.
So the council and maybe
Yeah, I'm Gretchen Robertson. I'm chair and I come from Dunedin as well.
Yeah, I'm Boyd McCall, deputy chair. But I come from Tapanui, which is the centre of Otago, from a farming background. Yeah.
Engineering, Dunedin-based councillor, farming background, local government background.
Kate Wilson, I live in Dunedin City as in Middlemarch, but that is Molyneux ward. So yeah, and so background government councillor at two institutions.
Yeah, kia ora, Alan Somerville, councillor based in Dunedin.
I'm Nick Andick. I manage Freshwater Policy and Ministry for the Environment.
Kia ora, I'm Vicky Edison and I work with Economic Advice and Industry.
Gary Callagher, I'm councillor from Alexandria and Shooting.
Lisa.
Kia ora te whānau, ko Alexa Force toku ingoa. I'm a councillor for the Dunstan area and I'm in Queenstown. Sorry, I can't be there today.
Elliot.
Kia ora. Yeah, apologies, I couldn't be there in person today either. But I'm councillor from the Dunedin constituency as well. Kia ora.
Right, we got some other people popping up online that I'm assuming are ministry for the environment staff. So is it clear?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Claire McClintock. I'm the Water Policy Manager here at Ministry for Primary Industry. So we've got a few of our team here as well. So we work closely with Nick and Vicky in all of the policy work that we do. So I'll pass over to Kate.
Kate is muted, yeah.
Kia ora koutou. Sorry about that technology. My name is Kate Simpson. I'm a principal advisor in the water policy team here, working with Claire and Monique, and I will pass over to Monique now.
Kia ora koutou. Monique Corson, so I'm a senior analyst in the water policy team at MPI.
Maybe Vanessa.
Good morning. Apologies for being late. I'm the director for on-farm support, and also I have responsibility as director for export growth and the water storage and capture area of MPI's work.
And then we've got someone from our forestry team as well, Bridget.
Thanks, Claire. Kia ora. I can't see myself, but hopefully you can hear me. Bridget Preston, I'm a principal advisor in the forestry sector policy team, and we are part of the National Direction consultation at the moment with some targeted changes to the National Environmental Standards for Plantation Forestry.
Right, we've got a great team there of diverse experts, I suppose, from Ministry for Primary Industries as well as our MEC friends as well. So that's awesome. So we've got quite a lot of our team there as well. So I'm not sure if you want to individually go through those or just introduce your team.
Yeah, so Tom and Sam and Julia and Tanner are online just listening and from my team. Just what collective room says. Yeah.
We've got Joe Gilroy, who's one of the general managers who looks after all of our regulatory work and also the non-regulatory catchment advisors on farm support, biosecurity.
I think that's everyone accounted for. We'll hand over to you.
Okay, so thank you for having us. Now, I understand you've been briefed and are reasonably familiar with the process, so we've got a little bit of a choice here. We have some slides primarily aimed at introducing the proposals to people, which might not be necessary for you, but if you want, we can use them just sort of structure discussion, and help maybe keep time. It's really over to you, or we can kick straight into questions and answers.
I think it might be good to structure it and just, it's good to hear directly too, the messaging from you is, it's just, it'll be good.
Good, yes. And look, my goal here will be to, I guess, try and give you some insights, some understanding that might not be clear from the discussion document itself. And you'll see the reason we have quite a few experts around it is because we understand you might have questions that are slightly broader than just what's in the freshwater package. We've tried to bring the right people along, and this is really for your benefit. If you want to ask any questions, please do. We'll do our best to answer. Okay. Monique or Claire, is somebody able to share the slides? Monique, thank you. So you'll be aware the government's committed to replace the national policy statement and national environmental standards for freshwater, and in doing so to rebalance the Manawatu in the interest of water users. They've also made some commitments around better enabling vegetable growing and water storage. And what this package does is it tries to essentially package up a set of proposed amendments to national direction that would deliver on those commitments. What we have in terms of timing and process is slightly different for freshwater than what you might have seen with the other packages of national direction. We have a two-step consultation process where at this stage we're consulting on broad options. We are seeking open feedback, and we would, if changes are progressed under the current system, go back out for an exposure draft later in the year, and that would be statutory consultation. So at this stage, it is open. Our scope is not as constrained as some other packages, and we can take this in a slightly different direction. The reason I mentioned this phase of our reform as well, though, is because the very first question in the discussion document you'll see is ministers want feedback on whether these changes should be progressed now or under the new RM system. There's been some explicit sort of intention communicated by Bishop in the public around the intention here wouldn't be to drive plan changes into the current system in the short term. If something was to be progressed into the current system, the idea really is where it can have an immediate effect and is well aligned with the government's objectives for our reform. So this is sort of direct insertions, activity statuses under an NES or influencing consent decisions in the short term. There's a timeline there, which, we'll share these slides and you'll have for reference. I guess the one caveat to put on that is obviously a lot will depend on the introduction of the RMO replacement legislation, when that makes it into the House and what the final plan for its delivery looks like. Thanks, Nick. We'll probably go to the next slide. So there's at least three categories sort of proposals, or at least that's how I'd characterize them. The first that I've sort of introduced, and we can pause here and discuss if you want, it is those aimed at the core management framework itself. And so you'll see there's a proposal here to shift to a different structure in terms of multiple objectives and essentially directing local governments to try and weigh and balance multiple outcomes around environmental, social, cultural, and economic well-being. There'll be some more explicit direction around managing the pace and cost of change, and some specific direction on government priorities, which I think I'll get to there. That actually forms a slightly different category around enabling energy growing and storage. This point. No, go ahead.
This is just an intro to the rest of the. I'm just wondering if these are the key things, whether or not you want to pay back on them now on this slide, or whether you can go into more detail on them.
Well, what I suggest is, we can play by you, but I would suggest we could pause at the end of this slide and take questions and discussion on those matters, and then move on to the next. I'll try and give you a signal where that's sort of on the next slide.
Yeah.
If we start going into it.
Yeah.
That shifts multiple objectives. That's actually quite fundamental to how the government's proposing to rebalance Te Mana Wai. So you'll see there on the screen, there are some fairly straightforward options put forward for rebalancing Te Mana Wai, and that is removing the hierarchy and making some adjustments to really try and be clear about what's required of regional councils. There's the option of returning to 2017 iterations of those provisions, and there's the option of removing those provisions in their entirety. But again, that really should be considered sort of in combination with this shift to multiple objectives and being clear that certain matters need to be balanced. The last thing on the slide you see there, so there are a few proposals aimed at providing you more flexibility in how you implement the NOP, and ministers have made a pretty conscious decision here to kick the tires and ask fundamental questions around what attributes national bottom lines should be prescribed nationally, if any, and why. And so the task here is to really make the case why national intervention is required to manage these things. And there's also a proposal in there to allow some additional flex, allowing councils to deviate from some of those minimum standards bottom lines with methods we've prescribed for monitoring in certain situations. Now, quite often, and this is probably getting into the discussion now, we are getting, I guess, some questions around how can we comment on these proposals around the NOP if we don't know what's going to be in the future system. And I think what I'll start with is the intention here is very much for decisions here would be ported over into the new system as far as possible. Obviously, some big decisions are yet to be made, whether or not environmental limits are set at a national level or not, or if they're delegated to regional councils. If you've got them, so there's a certain amount that we don't know, but what I do say, in answer to those questions is, the best thing to do is express how you think it should work in the future system. there's certain things we just don't know or won't be able to tell you at this stage. But I think while that's the case, the boundary between phase 2 and phase 3 environment performance reports, we can feed your feedback through to the teams and people working on our reforms. Shall I pause there?
Yep, definitely. We could definitely have some conversation on these because, yeah, we went through them yesterday as well and had some really good discussion there. And there were some questions as well. And also later on as well on the energy production and the storage, there were definitely some questions that arose as well. And yeah, we've got heaps of wide range of views. So you definitely want us to get into harness all of our feedback on Te Mana's Wai and North and all of that now. We'll just go for it.
Go for it.
Yep. Okay, we're not. So yeah, I guess we've got really good sort of embracing of a need to really look at Te Mana's Wai and some of the issues that have been caused around there. We've had some good discussion. We looked at the options yesterday. I'm not going to summarise for everyone, but you're welcome to say whatever you want to say. But I guess we did have a look at whether the principles around what looks a little bit like Section 5 of the RMA at the moment, and a whole lot of objectives and weighing as an option might exacerbate the issues that we've got at the moment of making it more complex than it needs to be to try and weigh all those up. It's going back to where we were. And yeah, it is the RMA and it is the issue of having to do all that and having been commissioners. I know I've done around 150 odd say. Andrew will have done more, Kate's done lots. That's the issue that you have. So yeah, and as you say, getting down underneath to what are those multiple objectives sitting underneath? We can't see that, so we're not sure. We're not sure whether it provides clarity or not. In discussions with Mana Whenua regularly as well, I guess. I don't think anyone is too worried about what it's called. It doesn't need to be called Te Mana's Wai, but it does need to ensure that we've got more efficiency, easier to work with. We are trying to achieve that. We want it to be simpler for everyone. It's gotten overly complex. We agree with that. We looked as well, there was, what was it? Maintain or enhance, which is essentially the RMA at the moment as well.
Yeah.
And I guess over time, I've been a councillor for 20 odd years here at ORC. That's where we get to with the community when we consult over the years as well. Maintain or enhance is what people expect. So that makes sense. And we pretty much all thought that was okay. Some people were worried that just maintain might not be good enough if you really degraded, but others strongly argued back. Actually, surely this will be sensible, and where it's degraded, it still needs to be enhanced. So, yeah, I guess it's some of what we talked about yesterday, but others will have other perspectives. So, anyone else?
This is talking about the regulatory space, which was only one part of it, and it doesn't talk to the non-regulatory space. It doesn't, and so it fails to. We're focusing so much on the negative space about, which is really unfortunate because what jobs for nature at a huge scale, and the hundreds of catchment groups out there are showing. If you enable the good stuff to happen in the non-regulatory space, this is only one very small part of it. In fact, it shouldn't be what is driving good behaviour at all. So I think it's a really unfortunate, very small part of a picture that this is like driving through the city, knowing that we're actually trying to get to Auckland from here, and we're focusing only on getting out to Dunedin. It is really frustrating. What we need is to know where people want us to go, where the government wants us to go, and if it's reducing costs and better investment. There are hundreds of examples out there of putting money into the catchment space and talking to the catchment about what the real solutions are and leaving you for lower level, and coming out with what the solutions and prioritise 3 to 4 priorities only. You cannot do 12 not attributes and expect to get any traction with behaviour. The other part of Te Mana Atuai, and I absolutely appreciate what quality is important, it is some end result of all of the activities. It is not the measure in itself. So when we've rolled out catchment action plans, and Catlins, for example, which has huge biodiversity values and huge high values, really high values, but are at risk from some of the indigenous biodiversity. The biggest issue there is pest control. There was no tools in the toolbox to be working that in the system. I personally think it's completely NPSFM should go. You should have a national policy statement of integrated catchment management, and that should have a whole lot of component modules that allow the tools to be in the catchment space, doing the good stuff, and then the rules are informed from that, what are needed from those discretionary part. And that's what's missing here is the big picture. Catchment groups just want to be getting going and doing this stuff, and they're being held up. I mean, we've got money in integrated farm planning projects with the FAI. I think you guys do your wonderful work that's still being funded, but it's being held up from engagement because there isn't that big picture, that direction. No one knows we're going to talk. Well, I hope we're not going to talk personally. I'd rather than staying in Otago and seeing the wonderful stuff happening here and the high water qualities we actually do have that not brought down to as if we have huge major problems if we don't. So, thank you.
Keen on integrated catchment management and aligning that. Yeah, and I suppose themes that come out there are important. That local voice is really strongly there, so we embrace that strongly. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that one is not just limited to individual catchment, it's more like communities of interest. So there might be a community that has very similar catchments, because you don't want it needs to be small, but not more distributed.
Yeah.
So you've got areas that have got commonality.
Yeah, the FMUs were too big. Potentially, but you could do this in tranches. You could direct the first step was to direct in councils to have those caps, the catchment action plans at any level, at a higher level, and then they can work down. But they should be then working out what their projects are, and then that informs the rules that you need to get there. It shouldn't be coming because thou shalt not do this. It's just not logical. It's not, and the science should be informing this stuff. But yeah, what are the real problems and what are we really needing to get to grips to? And every different FMU will be different. And whether it's sediment or then you put the carrots out there, then you put the toolbox out there at the front end in the non-regulatory space, which is where you get the gains.
Flexibility in the NOV is reflected here as well in what Kate's just said, I think. So we agree with that, and the simplification of that is also in what Kate said. We agree with that as well. Water quality scientist by background as well. It got way too complicated. We don't every river it should be based what tells us the story and what we're actually aiming to solve in that particular catchment or area of that river. So yep, we all agree with.
And the outcome should be measured environmental, economic, social, and cultural. And if you look at the bell curve behaviour, what you're trying to do is move the bell curve. You're not trying to move the rule line. And if the rule line goes too high, seriously, you just stop every innovation around. That's what we did last time.
So, who else? Tim, do you want to say something?
Well, probably not in the depths that's been covered at the moment, but it's just, the whole concept of Te Mana Atuai is an ideology. And perhaps in a way it is, but I mean, it has taken place with Freshwater. It's going to be replaceable. Certainly think that it's important for us still to recognise their involvement in this whole environmental management. Certainly wouldn't want to offend them in any way, but yeah, perhaps the 2017 provisions are okay. Yeah, it's better.
Gary?
Yeah, for me, there's an urgent need for all three of these focus areas because really Otago is sitting in a position of limbo where the current instruments that we're working under have created real confusion, real delays, real uncertainty, and basically any large-scale application that was brought to this council or any council around the country is likely to be declined. And then under what we currently function under, then it is an ongoing battle to bring that around into what would be somewhat forward. And so Te Mano Te Wai creates huge confusion and uncertainty. I think when it comes to the focus on vegetable growing, so water storage, that I think we need some clarity around off-farm and on-farm storage and stream storage, because the best bang for buck is in stream storage, and the real drive has been away from in-stream storage, but in-stream storage resolves the flood issues, the ability to store, the ability to take. On-farm storage is a totally different animal, and it doesn't solve all those other necessities that come with that. So Otago has loads of opportunities sitting there around that, and it doesn't need mass scale super intensity to follow from it. So yeah.
But the opportunity cost is permitting one and not the other.
Exactly.
Drive
Yes.
reverse financial.
Yeah, so the problem with on-farm storage is that it becomes ring-fenced only within that farming enterprise, and then so all it really does is improve the reliability of that for that one business. Whereas in-stream storage has a multiple sort of number of improvements and opportunities that sit with it. So that's a big focus on for me, but certainly removing. I personally would be looking at removing Te Mano Te Wai. There's just too much complication. There's very thoughts sitting on
different angles coming at that for different reasons. Yep.
Yep.
So Liz can talk for them. Good work. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that is actually bringing clarity, and uncertainty is so helpful, and that's the position we're in Otago. And it didn't progress, that would have brought some clarity. Well, that's in limbo, so waiting. So clarity is helpful. Also, so the clarity in whatever comes in doesn't lead to internal initiation. We would work out what does this mean, which is, I think, basically everyone's time if that happens. I am very concerned about the move to multiple objectives. I think there is great value in keeping the focus on protection and enhancement of the environment. And I think there's a danger when you move into those multiple objectives, we get into sort of trading things off. Oh, we can do this and we can cope with the effect on the environment. Whereas I don't think that is the right way to look at it. Rather, that for successful economic and agricultural and pastoral future and all that sort of industrial future, actually we need that to go hand in hand with a healthy environment. And trading things off works against. So I think, yeah, I'm very wary about those multiple objectives. In terms of flexibility, yeah, I think it's really important to be able to retain local decision making, because environmental conditions in different parts of the country are significantly different. And also community aspirations may be different in some places too. And so I know that maybe it's simpler. This is the national rule, but I don't think that's workable.
Yeah,
okay.
sorry. Go for it.
No, I just thinking back, why was the RMA created? You think back at the sort of number one principles around managing natural resources in a sustainable way to ensure that current generation and future generations can basically address those well-beings going forward. That's sort of how it started off. But over a period of time, it's linked towards the environment being over and above the most important thing. And I get it, that in that sense you do need balance for sure, but I think we've gone too far the other way. So I support the multiple objectives approach. Te Mano Te Wai, and I agree with Tim, I think that it should be more emphasised
emphasised on science. I think that would help to solve the problem. However, I don't agree with the hierarchy. I can give plenty of examples of where the hierarchy just doesn't even give proposals a fair chance even to be considered. And yeah, I think that just went a step too far. 217, returning to that probably is a good option. However, it might be better with a different name, and it may need to be couched a slightly different way. But I mean, if science comes into it, I'm strong support of that. In terms of national bottom lines, I'm still.
That's right, we can hear you. That's right.
Oh, sorry. In terms of national bottom lines, I still feel that we should have some clear direction from central government around national bottom lines. And the reason why I say that is, once again, go back to when the RMA was developed. I think one of the problems was that the national direction, my understanding is that that was going to sort of be the second stage of the RMA to set some really clear planning frameworks to work within. But over time, I don't believe that happened thoroughly enough. And in time, while case law was developed and, you know, the developers with the deepest pockets created, you know, different, I suppose, ability for the RMA to be considered in different ways, where I don't think that was the intention initially. So I think case law had a big influence on how it sort of got a little bit cloudy and sort of messed up with the RMA over time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, as Kate just whatever solution we end up, we need an enduring one, and it comes back to that. You know, we've got natural resources. Yep, we've got to respect and realise that they need to be managed in that sustainable way. We need to think about the future and all the rest of it. However, we can't be constrained so much that we can't get on, live a reasonable life and use those natural resources in a sustainable fashion.
Oh, yeah, that's the mic up. Business road.
Well, for me, it's pretty much all of the above, I guess. I'm pretty much in line with what Andrew's saying, pretty much. I think you need to have your multiple objectives because they're the four pillars of society, basically. So they'll need to be taken into account at some level. As far as bearing the cost, we've got to be really careful as to who bears the costs, because often when you're doing this sort of environmental work, it's not always, you've got New Zealand Inc. gets a return from it, so it's the wider community gets a return. It's not just the people who live close to the action that should be bearing all the costs. I think it's something that we need to be kept on. I think too often the cost is too closely related to the works as opposed to the outcomes. So the long-term outcomes. So I think we need to yes, I think when we're doing this sort of stuff, I'm a big, I said it yesterday, I'll say it again, time's our friend. So you need, when we've got big challenges, there might be little numbers, but often they're big challenges. You've got to give it time to rebalance, because you can't just try and, change the world overnight. So you got to play time, and I think that's hard. So I think when you're looking to maintain or enhance or improve, that improvement is something that's going to take time to get statistical benefits coming through. So we've got to recognise that. I think too often the time frames are too short. And I always think about with a lot of people and the local rural people, like at the end of the day, they think in generations. So I think we need to learn to think in generations as well when we're doing that sort of stuff. Demand of why, I just think it's become I think demand of why it's just becoming too controversial to be carried forward. And so we need to, but at the end of the day, demand of why looks at the basic effects of how we affect our environment. And it comes down to the end of the day, without water, we can't survive. So water is always going to end up having the top priority, whether it's ranked out or not, because at the end of the day, it's essential to life, for all forms of life. And so, but the monitor why is not the same everywhere you go. So there's some areas where, you know, you got where water's already under pressure. So water's going to have more of a centre stage in those decisions. You've got other areas where water's plentiful. And as long as you can maintain or, you know, maintain the water at the expectations of its local communities, there's probably more opportunity to use water for other uses. So, and I'm not too sure about returning to, I'm not completely over the 2017 demand on Hawaii, but I think that was everything equal criteria. I think that's probably similar to where I think that in each individual case, there'll be, you know, the most important ones will be ticked off before you go to the next one down anyway. So it's different outcomes for different areas. National objectives. I'm pretty much in Kate's camp, I guess, really with the national objectives to water quality, because I think we've got to get down to those communities of interest and let them decide what's important, and we need to do that in a structured way. So it has to be done, you know, like it has to come through like a structured program where you get all your involvement and basically come up with, you know, your 3, 4, not too many actual main targets for that area, because more than often if you target the key issues in an area, the hanger-ons will come with the key issues. And if you start, and as soon as you start bringing up too many targets, people just get confused and close the book and it just mucks with their heads. So you got to get it right down to keep it simple and make sure that when you end up with that clear vision. So you need to have that clear vision of this community, and then the community can buy into it. We've found that before the rules were made in some of the earlier catchment groups that were born out of necessity for the environment, as opposed to becoming trendy in a catchment group and being promoted. So you can't promote catchment groups; they have to come from the desire of the community where the catchment groups come from. But you can give the people in that environment the motivation to actually have their say. So it's really, well, then we got to look at the positive stuff, because if you end up getting people who taking ownership of the vision rather than the vision being handed down to them at a localized scale, they will go way beyond any regulation, because at the end of the day, any regulation has to be really bottom line stuff. It's for the, you know, at the end of the day, they're for the 5-10% that need to be kept anyway. So, but the rest of them are going to be, you know, you're going to improve way beyond what's the expected as station. We do also have to be, in saying all that, you have to be cognizant of the fact that some of the actions that the communities take aren't going to completely solve all the issues. Okay, so some of the issues is more landscape, more large scale stuff, and it may be just like with catchments now, they're over allocated, and maybe land use changes required, or significant changes to management practices. So that's, but in saying that, what you'll find is people develop over time. I'll give you an instance, probably in my area, because I have a dairy farm in an intensive dairy area, has sheep and beef amongst it, but winter grazing and environmental input, because it's come from the community initially, the farming community, where over half the farmers are paid subscriptions to be part of the group. They started changing their whole farm management practice way before good management practices were even formed. We wrote the good management practices thing at that stage. But yeah, and with the winter grazing, you know, probably the biggest infrastructure changes happening in that area are winter housing of dairy cattle. They're going up everywhere. And are they going up? It's not just for economic reasons, they're going up for environmental reasons. And that's because the community is buying into it, and more they're just popping up like mushrooms. Okay? And so that's like the win-win when your actual community's got the vision and they're working towards the vision. Does that make sense? So that's, but it's a real tricky balance, because there's you know, everybody wants to be able to say you need to be doing this, that, and the next thing, as opposed to the community telling you, oh, well, I think we could do that over time. And you've got to give your whole community time to go forward, because some people are innovators, some uptakers, and some are followers, and some need incentive to move. But having said that, we do have to have some bottom lines, because if you don't have any bottom lines, you don't have any ability to give mana to the work that's being done. The people are doing things, so the people are, because the worst thing that can happen is people are doing things, and down the road, Harry's just doing it all bad and nobody cares. So you've got to be able to deal with the Harrys or the Georges or whatever. George, so people change that for another Harry. So we do have to have some bottom lines, but they have to be they've got to be set at a level, I think, at the maintain level as opposed to a visionary level. So I think you've got to have a bottom line that's at the, to at least maintain and start to improve. And that's like you might have you might have a vision that might be a 10, 20-year vision, but you got to let your communities give them that time, and they'll go beyond that. But we don't need you got to be careful with your national directions, because if one size fits all doesn't fit for anything. As soon as you take everything to Wellington, you're going to get in the end you'll get pushed back, because it won't be enduring. So you got to try and you got to build a skeleton that can grow this flesh all over time, but you need to have a skeleton. So you need to have this lethal stuff. We talked yesterday about lots of instances around like aluminium, this areas that got naturally high aluminium or arsenic, this areas of
clarity 40,
naturally high water quality sediment issues, that's like snow melt, and you can't get your tube to work. It just doesn't work. So you've got to be really certain. It has to get broken down so they actually mean things.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think
that's okay. There's lots there, and it's all important, and we can feed that more, no doubt. We have opportunities as well, but you're getting a bit of a flavour. We've got Alexa's hand up. We'll just get to you, Alexa.
Thank you. Just throw in my 5 cents worth. To mana or to why, first of all, it's not ideological. It was a prioritising framework that recognises Māori Mātauranga, and I think that needs to be accepted no matter what we do with it. I think wherever we end up needs flexibility, because we're in an environment of decreasing availability of resources, but increasing demand for them. So whatever we do, we're going to get strong reaction and feedback. We need to clearly demonstrate that rebalancing and bringing in multiple objectives, and some of those other key messages that are in the slides, do not indicate more of a license to pollute. And that's key, and I don't see it in any of the materials so far. I see the need for providing multiple outcomes, definitely, but this needs to recognise that there is no well-being socially or culturally nor economically without environmental health. That's not recognised in here. So there is a hierarchy that has to come into play. And I just think that is probably the most important thing and the weakest thing that I'm seeing here. We mustn't trade off environmental outcomes, or in the words that I hear often, try to balance them. They can't be balanced. To achieve any outcome, we have to commit to the environmental outcomes. And I agree with some of the discussion I've heard here today, that just should be done from a local level, and catchment groups are likely the best place to figure out and understand these. So we need a set of rules that's wide, but while they're wide, they mustn't incentivise pollution, they must prioritise environmental health, and they need to incentivise research and development as well as catchment restorative action. Investing in our science and monitoring is really improving at our council. It's going really well. We're doing this and at pace, and we're developing catchment action plans with communities, and those plans, the two we've kind of getting together at the moment, or one's fully done and one's almost done, the people that are on them really represent the diversity of their place. And it's important to ensure that this remains incentivized somehow, or at least for our area. Bottom lines and attributes, I don't know what they should be. They probably need to come from communities too. But yeah, I'll come back to that in a sec. I agree that whatever's decided on, it really needs to be enduring. We can't cope with this flip-flopping, and that message needs to go loud and clear to our decision makers. It's expensive, difficult, uncertain, insane. So we've got to do that. I agree that Te Mana o Te Wai has been difficult, but mostly because it's been hijacked because of the misunderstood concept of mana. I agree that one size doesn't fit all. We need enduring, broadly accepted frameworks that will survive that political divide. And that, in my mind, would be broad and wide operating rules that provide some sort of bottom line, but with lots of flex, and I think that was your word, one of more people's words, with ample room for local application. For example, you can't be comparing the Clutha Delta with the headwaters high up above the Great Lakes. That just starts to become a nonsense. And you can't compare the Waikato with the Greenstone River. So there has to be that sort of thing in there. And so how you draft bottom lines that take that into account, I don't know, and probably it will come locally. And that's actually all I have to say. I'm sure you'll be pleased about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. It's awesome to get everyone. Elliot.
Kia ora, thank you. Just want to really support everything Alexa's just said, especially how all of those other objectives really do rely on a healthy environment and healthy freshwater, and so that they do flow down from that, and it doesn't really work the other way around. But yeah, really support everything Alexa just said. I was just keen to clarify that earlier question that Gretchen raised while we have the opportunity, as it did come up a bit yesterday and does seem quite critical, at least in my understanding of the national direction shifts, and that's what the details of maintain and improve are in those objectives. Is there a clear framework, or will there be, I guess, a clear framework to decide which water bodies have to be improved and which only have to be maintained? Yeah, that's the only big question I had, but yeah, thanks.
I can answer that. So I mean, right now, the framework for determining whether something has to be maintained or improved is a combination of the process in the National Objectives Framework, so setting targets and ultimately limiting resource use. And that's informed by minimum standards like bottom lines and an explicit requirement to maintain, and this is around those provisions about baseline state. We're not proposing to change that, but obviously where we land on how many attributes of bottom lines there are is critical to that question. And so if there are no bottom lines, then what has to be maintained or improved looks quite different. I can probably, actually, there's a few sort of key things worth acknowledging of this. Do we have any more?
No, you're turn to talk.
No, I won't have too much time so that we can move on to the other proposals,
Yeah.
but I just want to acknowledge that need for and desire for an enduring solution. That's universal, everyone we have talked to and ministers to. And so I think that's critical, I think, for submissions, is for us to understand where the consensus is and where the sort of the most enduring path is going to be through this. That's going to be useful for the future system as well. So that's incredibly useful if you can comment on, I guess, where you see the most enduring solutions being. I think it is worth probably, I guess, quickly describing to date what the functional purpose of the NOP has been. That's not to say that that's what it should continue to be, because I think what we're asking for here is from you, what are the functions that the NPS and the NOP needs to provide for you? But to date, it really has been about reducing scope for debate and litigation, right? When we prescribe specific measures and attributes and bottom lines, that is one of the goals. It is there to help manage cumulative effects, and so really delineate what the usable resource is so that we can stay within it where that is not apparent. And historically, that's been the case with nutrients in particular. It's where we have seen land use intensification and there hasn't been a signal back to land users or those in control of those matters, what is or isn't able to occur while still achieving what we want in streams and lakes and rivers. So these are some of the key functions it is there to provide currently. And I hear a range of views whether or not those are desirable functions you want in the future. So that's really useful to hear.
Okay. But the problem is you've got section 35 that says if something starts degrading, basically there isn't a requirement to find out why. It is literally just put land use rules in. I mean, some people want more rules. They're not targeted. They don't know what the problem is. We've just had a wonderful experience with MFF funding for the Auckland wetlands. A terrible end degradation, but no one did the work. Once the community went and did that work, and then the late Matt Hickey, they came up with a solution which, yes, it cost a lot, but it's awesome. I mean, it takes much. The opportunity was there for something brilliant, and the RMA is continually focused on negative only instead of opportunities. And there are a whole lot of opportunities to what does good planning look like? Looks going forward. What do we need in this environment to be looked good? And we don't focus enough on that. So, but we also don't have to find out what the problem is. It is section 35 has been an Achilles heel to everyone.
Yep. I think Carol, maybe let these guys have a talk and then we'll have another space at the end. No, that's all good. Okay, yeah.
No, look, my last sort of observation is, so in terms of, the views on Te Mana o Te Wai, I think, what we have noticed, for hearing submitters on previous amendment bills to the RMA or even direct feedback to us is, it is being interpreted in a variety of ways. And I think there are interpretations that can be broadly acceptable in terms of recognising the importance of environmental wellbeing to economic and social wellbeing. There are also interpretations that, are unacceptable to many, where it's perceived as preventing a council from even granting a resource consent in a particular case, or where the prioritisation within the hierarchy is seen as absolute. Without commenting on what I think the intention is or what it should be, I think what we'll need to be able to do is clarify exactly what it requires and be able to communicate that to ministers and to explain how that is or isn't aligned with their objectives or resource management reform. I don't think we have done that with the current expression of Te Mana o Te Wai. And so that's more, I guess, the context that we're in when we put out this proposal. What we are hoping to find out is how we can make it clearer, accepting that there are going to be a range of views about what it should be doing in the first place. We do want to absolutely provide that clarity. I agree. This might be a good time to move on to the next slide and category proposals.
Yeah, we can always come back at this time, but we want to get on to the others, yeah.
Good thing. So look, this next category, this is where we have proposals to introduce some enabling provisions relating to vegetable growing and water storage. This is to essentially give effect to some government commitments that are in the coalition agreement, but also informed by quite a few manifesto commitments pre-election. They do look quite similar, but given the nature of these activities, they are quite different. So in terms of vegetable growing, we are proposing to introduce some new objectives, specifically policies to recognise the importance of vegetable growing and address some very specific matters around crop rotation and concerns we understand the sector has. There's also this option of permitting it through standards, so something like national environmental standards to permit vegetable growing. And I just want to, I guess, acknowledge that's quite a challenging thing to do under the current system, where, in particular, we're not able to permit activities that we would expect would have a significant adverse effect on the environment. That's, again, why one of the questions in the discussion document is whether or not changes should be progressed now in the current system or be delivered to the new RM system, which may approach that issue quite differently. So it's not a given that we are able to permit vegetable growing the way that some people would want under the current system. But we do want to know what people's views on that are and what those standards could comprise, so that we'll do that work in much more detail than we have today. With water storage, it's quite similar in that we are proposing to introduce some objectives to provide for water security and encourage storage. There is also this option of creating standards to permit off-stream water storage. We are a little bit, our thinking is a little bit more developed on this, and we have been informed by council rules and feedback from officials today. So this is, I guess, a little bit more straightforward than standards for vegetable growing in a sense. I do take some comments we had earlier on, though, that obviously this is only one type of storage and might actually create some slightly perverse incentives. What I would say about sort of larger scale community storage or in-stream dams, so I'd point to the government's fast track legislation as one mechanism for delivering that or for pursuing that if that's something you want. There are a number of large scale water schemes going through that process at the moment. And again, similar to challenges in permitting vegetable growing, it is quite difficult for us to create standards that would permit larger schemes just because of the range of effects being so different depending on where they are, how large the storage is, what's downstream. It's a very difficult thing to create a one size fits all, and which is something we've struggled with many activities.
People want to say here, I think, is that the enabling of the off-stream is messing with the ability to do the large. So yeah, you've got that point.
The vegetable growing, I think, generally around the table was it's probably not an Otago issue to the same extent, and it has been a problem here. Although the definition of vegetable, we've got vegetable cherries and orchards and stuff, and we just need to know how that's going to play out. I think with that one, the water storage is a really interesting one, and what it doesn't have in there is flood mitigation, which needs to have in there. If you're looking at, in my perfect world, because I have got a perfect world, which that keeps me sane, is this integrated catchment management modules that can provide that. The whole system is broken when we have an adversarial system where almost audited by the minister. That's what we do our monitoring, and we send it to the auditor virtually, do we please it or not, and we've been on both sides of that can, don't worry. But it should be actually, this is a situation, we need your help, Minister, can you direct something? And it may be directing DOC and other stuff, and if there should be a relationship, it should be collaborative. It shouldn't be that, and this is, we've set up the RMA to be like that as the reporting network. You know, it may be funding that we need to do something good. We've got really bad tools in that regulatory space. And so if we were looking at water storage for flood mitigation, I know one's on Australia, many here and here, there's actually quite a few around there. It could be saying also, how can we get more wetlands? How can we do this stuff in a really productive, positive sense? Those are opportunities, but the RMA doesn't provide those opportunities. They provide for mitigation of negative effects. I mean, it actually does talk about benefits, but no one ever goes looking for them. And so when you set up your catchment plan, action plans, you're looking at both sides of the thing. What do we need? How can we drive better water and water for the environment? You know, is 10% of your storage going to be available for doing flushes and but keeping it in the river? If we do the stupid thing of permitting it to be owned on farm, it will never get back in the river. You can't plan that. It's much, you're going to have heating issues, you're going to have transpiration issues. It's inefficient, and it actually takes up usually really good land. It's really nice on tax levels.
Well, I'm not advocating it actually, but yeah, it takes the ability away from community type management.
It's huge.
You've got everyone out for their own as well.
It's hugely costly compared to these community schemes, which can take. So we have a system where one person working can get a consent more easily than a catchment good that ticks so many more boxes. It's perverse because there's no catchment plan or what looks good. We haven't got any good work. What is good? This is where I see that non-regulatory space, the non-regulatory space developing what good looks like in their area. And even if it's a mine, there's nothing telling McRae's mine that if you are doing mitigation, actually the biggest issue in this area is this, and you could be, if you want to offset, I hate that term, I hate compensation ideas, but it actually may give you a direction that it may be best management funded for 10 years. That may actually give you the best benefits in your community.
But
Sorry,
Sorry.
Gary, you go, you know the space, yep.
Water storage though too, if this just focuses on on-farm storage, there are other elements that still require consenting, so that's the taking the water and the dam. If the timeframes associated with those are too short, which they currently are, then none of these projects will go ahead. So you could make it far more relaxed and easy to move ahead with the actual structure, but the structure won't go ahead if you can't get a 20 to 30 year consent. At the moment, the risk is that consents can be frustrated in a very short time frame, so they're just not bankable. When it comes to vegetable production, what will possibly happen across Otago is that vegetable production will become a small part of what is an overall mixed land use. So certainly in my area, I'm seeing that one pivot is potentially being put aside for carrot growing or what. So, you know, that is a higher intensity than what is currently done. But then they're critical crops that it's like growing potted, you have a lot more inputs input, the investment is higher. So the risk then is higher when it comes to environmentally what might happen from the farm. But I don't see that all scale farms are going to go side by side full on vegetable production. So I think there'll be a very much a way, certainly from a national direction around how we can make this easier for people to do. It'll be at a lesser scale.
We don't think we've got any restrictions on vegetable growing in the farming. I'm not sure.
No, so this does actually vary around the country. So like you say, it can be more of an issue, say in the Waikato and Whenua, especially in the proposed plan rules. That, we're very aware, so vegetable growing and indeed water storage, there are permitted activity rules that vary around the country. You know, to some extent what we've got, or are thinking that that's being modelled on that. We're not necessarily proposing to go any further than you already do. Some of this might be a way to drive some consistency between regions and be more enabling in places that aren't as considered as, for example, you might do.
You just rely on the commercial forestry, you can't get much more enabling than that.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out what was it. I guess it's nutrient use, and then we were trying to figure out actually we don't need to totally load this up with ridiculous amounts of nutrients from a North Otago person with the most amount of veggie growing experience. Was arguing yesterday, who's not here today. So that's a limiting factor. The other one's water. So are we actually limited for water? We're saying no as well. But a good thing would be in Kekanui, where you have got community schemes, they work together really well to be able to prioritise, like Gary says. When you need that water, you can release it for that use. Your carrot crop or your tomatoes or whatever they needed at a certain time, and communities are working together to ensure that happens. What's the other limited thing would be land, but as others are saying, it's not necessarily that traditional way value soils where actually that's all happening these days. It's far more interspersed. So it's possibly not in Otago as much.
Although what has become an issue is that Otago is quite high end for horticulture, viticulture.
Yeah.
And where we have some improvement happening, all the ducks line up to get reliable supply of water, so it might be cleaner as opposed to any young river.
Yeah.
They are stepping ahead, but what we are seeing is that other areas are actually diminishing. I've just heard of one organic apple orchard that is they're going to livestock. So there is more of that happening. That's just one of many agriculture as well. But so I think we'll start to see a decline in some of those. So the vegetable growing aspect, I think, has a slightly broader out of the horticulture. So very high cost establishment, and then it needs every other part that consents that certain place for dam and for storage that we run to all be available to.
And future focus, because the climate is changing. Some things will come really rapidly available.
Sorry, you go.
No, I was going to say, I think it's a good thing that you're looking at some enabling for commercial vegetable growing. I'm thinking from the land use perspective, and the emphasis on growth, housing availability, and most of your communities are basically built in flat areas historically. So whether it's land use 1, 2, 3, whatever, generally speaking, most of the land is close by community. So I think any that type of enabling provisions is going to just help give the environmental protection. Then you've got the reduced sensitivity as the urban areas creep closer to those communities as well. So yeah, anything that would help them would be good.
And as well, yeah, that's evidence and where it is an issue, we're all for it. Barry touched on one around the Clotha River, which is a big one. It goes into both of these areas, storage and yeah, production, and obviously it's yeah, there's some competition, I suppose, between renewable energy and then the storage that those lakes provide in the big river, and it's a necessary resource as well for driving all that diversity and primary production that we've got that makes Otago so unique as well. But yeah, we're not entirely sure what Contact's doing with fast tracking actually at the moment, but yeah, there's that tension between renewable energy and actually we need that water as well. And it's not just about developing, it's about the stuff we've got currently as well. Yeah. That's our competitive advantage as well, is the natural storage that we don't have to spend multi-billions on.
I think on storage and the industry too, while I'm not sure what others around the country are saying it's the fast track, but there is a fear around this a community group bringing the fast track application, the cost of bringing the deposit needed for it, and then having to live with the end conditions that will come out in a very fast time frame. And whether they will be workable or not, and the ability to revisit those and challenge those when they're issued is a real concern.
And there aren't any tools yet on the other stuff, which makes it so hard as we adopt land and stuff like that. That is as well.
Yes, exactly.
Otherwise, if you haven't got those tools in this new legislation and getting to the party on how that might work, then it doesn't matter how good your scheme is, they're going to be issues.
If there are impediments in the way that needed to be resolved, and whether they can be resolved under that fast track application, that's the question.
Yeah.
As in some part of it might need to be on dock land.
Yeah. And I mean, they're probably going to actually significant wetlands, or significant wetlands or outstanding wood bodies and affected, but there's no guidance at the moment for the rules with cut what she shouldn't do, but no idea about what the positives might be, and outlining it, and it's a really hard. So that's what's driving this. Everyone's saying this to do on farm is easier. It is a hell of a lot easier to do on farm. But it's not. It's got good results.
Yeah, you can, and then we can get back to letting you say.
No, I just like to say, it makes me a little bit nervous. I don't think we want to be just completely enabling of in-stream dams and say that's what the prevent them, because at the end of the day, in-stream dams do affect the environment quite closely. So I don't think it's the complete view of this council that we should be promoting in-stream dams as a golden bullet per se. But what I would say is there are cases where the environmental effect of in-stream dams may be at a minimum level enough that the benefits of the dam may outstrip that, but not as per se everywhere. And I just think what's actually happening is what should be happening is where the economic gains are shifting close to the drivers of the economic gain, which water is one. So obviously you're getting the intensive development of water intensive industry close to the river. And that's a natural progression. That's what probably should have, because taking water from the Clotha River is going to have a lesser effect on the environment than taking it from waterways that are already under pressure.
Yeah, that's the composition that goes on, and a whole lot of things that are
And once again, we've got to look long term as to where the pressures are, because we don't want to be getting ourselves into a situation where we have to transport water to feed populations that are being built in the wrong place.
But the problem with that is that if we all look to the Clutha, every drop of water from the Clutha has to be lifted out of the river and taken uphill. Whereas the ability to use the rivers that we currently use, which in flood times and for a lot of the year they have a higher flow, they have a big variance. The schemes that are off the Clutha are possibly the most expensive in New Zealand to operate. And so we will move everyone to intensity that they have to be functioned from for and get from the Clutha. So the Clutha's, we're very lucky to have it. It's a massive resource. It's a huge source of water, but it is a very costly option. That's just a key point.
Can we just add into water storage? Sorry, wildfire risk. It's huge in our Tussock wetlands, and they're substantial. And actually, they do that as well. I know it's part of the resilience of climate change, but if it's not articulated, it's forgotten. And especially with forestry taking over, the areas of behind Lawrence and where there's Tussock getting into Tussock fires getting into forestry, or forestry getting into Tussock, having close water supplies, and that's again one of those things that high level water storage is an absolute critical. It's worth looking on that to see what it looks like.
I think often the stands you're talking about already have dams, so
Yeah, there's
they're not very much.
actual situations with the size of the dams. Now, Otago as well, stood on where dams really go.
Yeah, it's minimalistic, but it's
Yeah,
better,
you
much
probably
better
count them
outcomes.
on one hand of the actual sites you've considered.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, so shall we move on?
Yeah,
sure.
You need, do you want to flip to the next slide? We're almost there, actually. So look, what I've got on this slide is the third category of proposals where we're looking to make some adjustments to activity-based regulations currently. And this is, principally around wetlands. This is where some of the bigger changes are. This is around trying to make the definition of a wetland more workable for the purpose of our regulations. So right now there's a pasture exclusion built into that definition, which we understand is quite complex, requires ecologist advice to.
Very expensive.
Very expensive. We're also proposing to exclude induced wetlands from that and essentially devolve that down to management at the local level rather than bringing them into the restrictions in the NES. And then around the pasture exclusion, it's a little bit of a kind of a quid pro quo swap we're looking to consider here, which is rather than excluding pasture from the definition in a complex way, can we include it but simply permit some farming activities that are common and don't necessarily harm the wetland? The proviso there is obviously we really need feedback and more information on what those activities are and the extent to which they don't do.
And the risks that second part gets taken out and the substantial wetlands that are then created. The next step. So how enduring one has to be reliant on the other.
Yeah.
And that is the problem. You could just call them CSAs and you'd have exactly the same savings.
And so, we don't want to suggest we have the answer here in this. This is really fishing for a better solution to a problem we currently have. It's not a given we will have a better solution at the end of this, but we do want to ask the question because we know there's a problem. With fish passage, this is really about just consolidating some of those information requirements and standards on the permitted activities, whether we can streamline that a little. And in particular, whether temporary structure should be treated differently. This actually goes to flood mitigation because we understand there might be issues around gravel extraction activities getting caught out where we might need temporary culverts or crossings. We do want to hear about that if that's an issue so that we can maybe provide a more enabling approach. The last bulk of the text here, there's some proposed changes around farmer-facing regulations, and this includes removing the requirement to exclude stock from wetlands. We're talking about lower intensity farming systems here. We are acutely aware, and we have been, I guess, shown some examples by the High Country Accord of stations where wetlands are quite prevalent, stocking rates are very low. It is not economic for them to fence them out. It's not clear what the dominant sort of pressure on those wetlands is, and it may in fact be invasive vegetation, crack willows, wilding pines. But we we want to consult on the option of exempting that or essentially removing that requirement. There's also some questions in there around whether or not we can improve the reporting dates for the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer cap or the option of removing the cap in its entirety. So it's a little bit of a grey bag of adjustments we think we could make to activity-based regulations with things that ministers have asked us to consult on. What I would say though is, again, this is open consultation, this isn't statutory, there would be an exposure draft later in the year. We're not necessarily limited to this in terms of scope. You know, and you guys as local government will know best what the issues are in implementing national direction and where central government intervention or absence of intervention could be helpful. So we do want to hear if there are things we're missing that would be helpful for you to manage your resources locally. And then I may as well do the last slide, if you want to click this forward. Look, the last proposal I have here on the slides is around, so this is proposing a new requirement to map source water risk management areas. This stems from the Havelock North Inquiry's recommendations and is really intended to be a complementary measure to assist you implementing the existing NES for drinking water and for suppliers to produce their risk management plans. Obviously, it does task you with a mapping exercise, and that has an associated cost, and you may have views on how best to do this, but this proposal is relatively straightforward steps for itself. And that's the end of the slides. We can probably do another round of questions. I'm not sure where we are in terms of time, but what my team will do is we're taking notes, we'll take this away and formulate our thinking, because we're yet to sort of receive all submissions, and then we'll need to look at the themes and issues that are being raised and then provide ministers with some advice on what to do next. It is really helpful having these discussions because, you know, it's those first submissions, early discussions you have that help you formulate what are the categories, what are the headings that we need to give ministers advice on. So this is quite helpful for my team. Thank you. But that's that. I think we're at the end of the slides, are we, Monique?
All at the end.
Okay. So I'm just double checking how much time you've got, because I think we've got scheduled in a bit more time, but yeah. So I think there were some questions that came in today, but hopefully everyone's had a chance to raise those. Richard?
I would have a discussion on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's important, and there's plenty of time. I think
we've another 45.
So I think that's quite a valuable topic for you to put into, given we spend a lot of time.
I'd love to tell the government how much money we're prepared to invest in it, because it has been an absolute loss. I mean, it's so expensive doing that past month. It's ridiculous.
Kate lives in the arbitrary area. Well, she works on that. Yeah, so the special exemption area. So has a lot of experience there, but just mapping there's a particularly complex environment for that mapping. Yeah.
So I have a question on that. So I understand. So in terms of, I guess, the expense of mapping wetlands, I guess how much of that relates directly to the pasture exclusion? In other words, does one proposal to remove pasture exclusion materially affect another proposal, which is to remove the requirement to map wetlands, because of, I guess, the feasibility of doing it?
Yeah, Fleur and Richard, do you want to talk about that?
Well, we kind of talked about it in the car on the way, and like, I think that's something we can definitely include within our submission. I don't know if
my suspicion is that it significantly depends. So the tools available to map wetlands for the pasture exclusion are advancing all the time, as we know through LiDAR and AI, those sorts of things. So there are ways and means of doing that quite quickly and ground truthing quite quickly. As soon as you throw in the pasture exclusion piece, it just turns into a nightmare. Yeah. So I think there is a significant difference between the two, depending which direction you take it.
But then the mapping will be challenged if the end result is rules or something that is going to negatively impact where there are real risks. So the exclusion one in the scroll plains was excluded because the risks of shutting that up were greater than grazing it. And that is that local knowledge that is important. And if you don't leave the tools in that provide for that exclusion, and the same as in the high country with grazing, then you're going to have some really perverse results. I would be really negative. I mean, there will be a lot of people very negative getting land designated as a wetland without Indigenous biodiversity credits, providing something alternatively, or an absolute tie-in that if you're going to have that, they're tied together. The problem at the moment, they gave them an out. There's a real risk that the next government will come and say, actually, we're not going to worry about one, and we'll if that's winter, wetlands are wetlands and get out, and that's going to be really difficult. But in the upper scroll plains, it made fencing impossible anyway, but by the definition, it was bizarre. And they move, they're dynamic, and so even putting a fence here, I mean, last flood we had through the creek moved 20, this isn't in the wetland area, moved 25 metres. All of these things are perverse when you try and fence anything. Mm-hmm. That's actually what we should be dealing with, is fence where you need to fence. If there's a local issue that needs to be fixed, stressor or pressure. If it isn't there, don't try and fix something that ain't a problem.
And the scale element, 1.05 on the.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because those other ones are going to be dealt with as CSA anyway.
Yes, sorry. Can I just clarify that comment around the site was actually something that the staff put forward to generate a discussion yesterday was, so that didn't come out of the proposal, but was the size at which we are required to map is of a scale that it is. But in terms of just the outcomes and then the potential for flow effect of how that land's used, there was a discussion yesterday on what might be a more suitable size to set as a minimum to require mapping. And so that's where that.
Did you land that? Just have interest? Did you land what the size was?
We had a discussion that sometimes quality is more important than quantity as well, depending where it is, like the little towns up in the Alpine area, they're really high quality Indigenous, but also provide that sponge for catchments and water flows and flooding and all that stuff. So you might have a network of 1,000 tiny wee ones that are important, but it wouldn't. Just because it's compulsory to map only the bigger ones doesn't mean that we couldn't, as a council, say that they're regionally significant and therefore bring them in. So I think we probably got to that point.
It took me a while to remember it. Critical source area.
And there's, I guess, been a bit of a theme with our activity-based regulations through amendments to the RMA with grazing stock exclusion is I guess, it's not, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not directed or required at the national level that it won't occur locally, and ministers have a view about whether or not it is most appropriate for that to be done locally. It is really useful for us to know, I guess, your ability to do something like the mapping in the absence of national direction. And, I mean, the other thing I wanted to say is that, with, say, removing the pasture exclusion and instead permitting activities, that the set of proposals is fraught with trade-offs because obviously we're solving one problem by potentially increasing the scope of the regulations massively, and I guess we would appreciate the information on what that scale looks like. But then with mapping, there's probably some opportunities there as well, because if you are actively mapping wetlands, if you are engaged in managing them, that can give us or ministers more confidence that they will be managed appropriately locally.
So this is where farm plans talking to a catchments plan could be the alternative pathway, because you've got a specific issue that you can deal with differently, and the rule, you've got the alternative pathway from what the rule is. So thou shalt not generally, because it might make sense somewhere, but you can have an alternative pathway.
So just back to you, I think the issue as I see it is that you are creating an argument before you, right at that first step where you're trying to generate the data that then you can then decide how you will use that. So, because that's what that pasture exclusion is, it's so unclear that it ends up in an adversarial position before you even got to the point where you understand where your wetlands are. If you take that out, then the conversation becomes, we have our data, what do we want to do with that in terms of the outcome we're seeking nationally or for us within Otago? And work with our community on that basis, where we can't even get there because we're too busy arguing around how many blades, you know. No, I don't want to block that system, so I understand why it was because they were trying to find a balance, but in reality, it's not practical. So then there's got to be an alternative. And if you can move, it's quite a negative way to look at it, if you can move the adversarial piece as far down the process as you can, you make a lot of projects. And then you're left with a few things at the end where you can have a constructive conversation with the community about the outcomes you're seeking. When you set up a system where all the adversarial conversations happen at the front end before you even have the data, you're setting yourselves up for a really expensive and ultimately a process that will fail. So that's the way, that example of wetland mapping, I think, that's how I would explain the situation we put ourselves into there, and that can apply in other areas as well. You know, the data should be the data. We shouldn't set up a system where we're arguing about that. We should set up a system where we all have that, and then we start to talk about how we're going to use that to get the outcomes that we want.
And it's had a huge cost on the community
of
engagement. And then actually it's the saddest thing when you look at the investment into our community. It's just a really lost opportunity the way that happened.
Oh, no worries. Sorry, I forgot that. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. I think we all agree that wetlands are important. Really like the approach for constructive wetlands and making that formidable, encouraging. I think I like the idea of having intensification. I like the idea of having a simple role that's keep it simple and then you get your mapping done. You need to somehow develop a simple rule around intensification as to the impact of stock in areas. So once you get that, put the two together, you can put some simple, like most you'll find, like talk to Kate, go like, you know, if you've got wetlands that are low intensity stocking areas, you know, cultivation and spraying with, you know, using herbicides and all that. So that simple management stuff, you don't want that that's going to alter them because they're going to stay there, because we need more wetlands, not less wetlands. Okay, but let the stock come and go, because at the end of the day they can do a good job as well as a bad job. Okay, but we also, in the more intensive areas, we need to actually protect them from stock, because stock will decimate a good wetland in no time. But that's the way what you're planning is in your intensive areas, that there may be fencing rules for, you know, large animals, ones that cause damage.
So do you think if we send that signal at central government level, that it's something that you at the regional level can manage over?
Yeah,
definitely.
That flows into farm.
And then through your farm,
through
the farm planning process, you're going to find all the smaller ones as well.
Yeah.
And then you have a one-on-one discussion around them when you put the certifier. So as long as your certifiers are, you know.
The first thing is that it's actually some of those alpine farm ones that are being absolutely wrecked by four-wheel drives. Absolutely shockingly on dock land.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, we're worrying about actually something that possibly isn't nearly as important and not dealing with the big stuff.
I think Otago's high country and extensive farms would certainly back the core message that you're getting.
Yeah.
In those extensive areas, stop actually doing that thorough management tool.
Yeah.
And anything that you might do, if the intensive thinking was applied to those extensive areas, you would actually potentially put weapons at risk.
Yeah, and it's a perverse result is that requiring the fencing requires the numbers and the intensification of other land that will drive a really forward. Yeah, you can't. I mean, Mount Aspiring is $1 million a fencing.
Yes. So I think they're pretty much, we all think pretty much quite similar. But but wetlands have got to be elevated. Like
Very elevated.
Yeah, like they've got to maintain their ranking. They're so important. It's so important we, you know, make it easy for them to be, looked after and multiplied wherever we can. And there's all sorts to really. The fertiliser one was interesting yesterday as well. We probably all agreed that next any nitrogen reporting should be aligned to the year, make it no-brainer type stuff. It was really quite interesting around the table that the 190 cap, we perceive that the 190 cap's become accepted, people have adjusted to it, and it's like the 190 cap's done its job, so why remove it? So, and it was an interesting outcome from yesterday's meeting, to be fair. That I think the general consensus was that it's for synthetic nitrogen only. Yeah, that it's been accepted in the area, and probably there's no reason to take it away.
Do you think people would go back to the old? But it wasn't here anyway.
Yeah, it's a good
Well, we
question.
didn't have the. We didn't
Some
have a lot.
people- Some people did think that people would put on those sensitive amounts again, but yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. It's pretty costly too. So
Yeah.
The price. Yeah.
That may be the reason why we had, there's quite a bit of a reduction because of the cost.
Yeah.
Andy. Oh yeah. Why would you remove it? Is the question.
Why would we remove it? Because it's working and no one's objecting to it. Because of adaptive management, it hasn't cost of production. So.
If that message came through in the submission, would be helpful.
Be individuals because it's a rule, they don't want rules, but generally there's been very little feedback, and some of the noisy groups out there, they've submitted on reduced as opposed to
It should be a target, not just as seen as a target and going, leaving it that something you may say which we have for future. That's a discussion that should come out with science.
And I think if I look at that, we look at this like nationwide. This is theory according to Lloyd. Like we got to make it so that synthetic nitrogen is not the cheapest way to create production, because if that's the case, it gets people will use it and you'll get slippage from the system. Whereas right now we're getting very limited. We think we're getting limited slippage from the system because it's being with the 190 because it's all being used in the productive cycle. But if we get and that's because the price of urea went so high. That did the job. So we just we can keep it this terrace on other things.
The FAP plus is also reported on that. So the farm assurance planning. Where the again non-regulatory space that has been pushed. So your accounting and the greenhouse gases are all being accounted for in your FAP plus projects. So that again is you get more money for not doing that stuff. So that's a good space that's all aligned. Again, non-regulatory tools.
Is there anything anyone wants to say that they haven't had a chance under those categories, I suppose, really quickly? Yep.
We had a couple of things. One is the discharge of wastewater that's been treated to a level that literally won't have an effect, more than a mild effect on the environment. So I'm just giving an example of a TA, Territorial Authorities wastewater system. It's a tertiary treated effluent, and then being able to discharge it directly into a water body is and having minimal effects. I just think that should be more enabling rather than heading down the other pathway. And I know that it's a cultural thing.
Just wondering if this is in the wastewater standards.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking for freshwater. I'm thinking discharging wastewater from freshwater into a water body.
So I mean, well, that's like Christian mentions that's certainly the approach Tamata otherwise taking with 3 waters and discharge of wastewater. So they just consulted on standards that if you can comply with, you would be able to discharge that to the environment without a resource consent.
Right.
They're saying the onus is on the discussion between the local council and the community on what they can stomach, basically. So, but yeah, then they come along to the regional council with their proposal and we just beep it through the tax register if it meets the standards, basically, and we don't get a say on whether, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and the other one was the stormwater, basically, once again, discharge into a freshwater body. So, some industries use, probably you could say forestry, silt traps, so contaminated water. So the silt trap regime allows filtration, so eventually we get a better outcome further down the track. You can also use it for an example with residential activity where you've got stormwater detention ponds, and you've got several detention ponds. So once again, the ability to discharge a contaminant into a water body, I think it's important to be able to allow that. That maybe it's controlled activity, but to allow that without too many impediments, because it's an actual process to achieve better filtration of water.
But with a level of phosphoric treatment.
Well, yeah, if it's only silt, for example, once it goes to the tertiary ponds, or the silt is left in the ponds anyway. But if it's in contaminated water, yes, agreed.
The cost to some of those communities for some of the infrastructure is really scary. Where I come from, the township had from an $8,000 to a $48,000 just development contributions in theory because of development needed for something that has for a sewage plant. The sewage plant apparently had struggling. We've been told about this community, and the very sad thing is on that we've done a project on E. coli as an issue, but it's certainly not coming from sewage plants. And it's discharging to land now. But that's what the basis of that was, the people I talked to at the DCC was that the ORC was requiring discharge to land at a high quality, but it's not causing any problems. And that will actually kill development in my township, already is having an effect. First, really, really stupid. Without our rural communities need to be thriving. And so some of that stuff is just rubbish.
We had questions around culverts. With culverts for rural sector, the more permitted the ability to install when needed, the better. Less involvement to have to request the ability for culverts and sizing is
waste of time for everyone.
And fish pads was the other one actually. Yes. Yeah, really good to have culverts in certain places where we've got galaxies. This whole idea of trout and salmon in every area being an important feature in section 7 rather than section 6. So we need to distinguish them and probably put them further down. We've got species that are really important that have been eaten by trout.
So this is interesting. So, I mean, it would be useful if this is two regulations at play here.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we permit in-stream barriers provided they meet certain standards. This is culverts, weirs, dams for the purpose is to enable fish passage. We then also have, this direction in the National Policy Statement for Planning which tries to grapple with this very issue where you essentially identify desirable and undesirable species, because we recognised at the time that you need to keep trout out to protect certain populations. If there's a problem there with us, in terms of what we're committing in national environmental standards, please do let us know, because this is the time to fix it.
So like culverts are permitted with have compound culverts are basically a permitted activity. There's a bit of stuff around installation in their practices.
The interesting one is we've got no ability to do anything for existing structures like dams, and the eels are, it'd be great. It's huge need to get the eel population back up into their own lakes. And the fact they can't get past that is a really sad indictment because no one's making contact, they won't do it. It will probably be minuscule in their budget compared to what they but that's a really
so it's asked for.
Well, it's again, because we don't have a framework that they can say we're making this environment look good because we don't have a good planning framework. It's not something they can tick the box that they're meeting those. In the same way, farm plans can say, I'm meeting the environment needs. These other big projects should be doing the same thing as a catchment and driven to that stuff. That's a really sad thing.
Today we had a question in regards to the national objectives frameworks and the proposal initially to ensure the scope of the NOF national bottom lines are focused on matters of national importance. So the question was around what is the definition of national importance? Can you shed any light on that?
I can explain. So in terms of the framework we've got, in an ideal world, there's a discussion about your long-term vision and what community values, then how you're going to measure and manage that, and then move into setting targets and limiting resources to achieve those. We prescribe certain measures at the national level that you have to measure and manage. These are the attributes, and some of those, or most of those, we prescribe minimum standards for national bottom lines as well. Over time, the scope of that framework has increased significantly, right? So in 2017, we went from 9 attributes to 22 or 23.
Environmental attributes we're talking about.
That's right, but obviously the rationale in case we're including those different quite massively. So in terms of, right from 2014, we've had attributes around nutrients and E. coli, and that's a combination of those are common issues nationally that we are over allocated and not doing a good job of managing the cumulative effect with lots of users as far as nutrient losses goes. E. coli as well, is a slightly, it is a similar issue, just slightly different in that it's human health, and we have established guidelines to base that off, and the minister, the government at the time had their swimming target as well. Over time, what we've added is obviously sediment. It's a big one that we've recently added. The rationale for that lines up very similarly to nutrients, although how it gets into where is different. But then there's also fish IVI, for example, which is measuring the presence or absence of fish. That's not a cumulative effects issue so much as it is about measuring the state of your ecosystem in the river. There's also others, purified and MCI were added to sort of more focused on the environmental outcome itself, possibly a little bit more removed from the things that are affecting it. So the rationale for different attributes, it differs, and what we want to test here essentially is whether the mix of attributes that we have is justified at the national level, because some of this doesn't necessarily need to be prescribed at the national level. We've heard of DO, dissolved oxygen is not an issue. Why should you measure and manage it everywhere? We can be more or less confident that something is a widespread issue, depending on the attributes. So we would say the big 4 are nutrients, E. coli, sediment.
I think we get that. We got totally off track thinking that matters of national importance might be the ones that are in the remain or something.
Yeah, that could be influenced by.
Whereas you were just saying they're basically science, common themes that we deal with like E. coli across the country. Yeah.
So how are those levels influenced?
Where sort of bottom lines are set.
Yeah.
Again, that's different over time as well. So you might say, if you go right back to 2014, some of this is based on essentially tolerance for impacts, is the way I describe it. So where you set your nitrate toxicity bottom line is a question of, are you willing to tolerate 80% of species affected, 85, 90? So it's informed by the science, but there is a value judgment in here. And being aware of, I guess, the implications of what you're doing when you make that decision.
The question is there political influence on those segments?
Well, I mean, political, you could call it that. I guess what I would say is that's not inappropriate. So that's probably a good example that I just gave, is that the science can answer a question for you, can tell you what this concentration of something will do to the environment. It can't answer, I guess, for you what you want to achieve or whether you're willing to tolerate those impacts. And so successive governments and ministers have had to make different decisions about what they want to tolerate. So more recently, for example, the attributes, around say sediment, the bottom lines are developed slightly differently, where the science providers and a team looked at it's called an observed over expected approach. Essentially, they were looking to sort of set the bottom line based on an acceptable deviation from a natural state. which varies a lot. So that's very different to saying I'm willing to tolerate X%. It's more I'm willing to tolerate a certain amount of deviation from the natural state. So it's a overcomplicated.
Yeah, we understand that one. Oh, sorry,
just-
I like your
well,
line.
No, I want completely different.
I did.
Well, no, I was just gonna say as we try and move to, trying to be more enabling of, of our communities and bringing the communities in, community level catchment posts and, getting that say coming through and falling from the bottom to the top as opposed to the other way around. I think that's quite important. But to get that credibility, you've got to be able to monitor what's going on. And I think it's just, I just want to come back to, I just think it's just so imperative that we really look after the farm plan systems that's being developed and don't have the farm plan system watered down, because actually get the credibility of what's happening on ground has to be substantiated by a process or a system, okay, which is the farm environment plan system, use of certifiers, etc., etc., etc. So I'm just really I'm just really concerned that we start doing stuff and then we end up, making everything really enabling, but there's no actual monitoring of what's actually happening. Because for me, the farm plan via your catchment group networks is probably the way to go, because that actually puts non-confrontational people onto properties, and then you get to that one-on-one talk. You make big gains on the one-on-one talk, and your one-on-one talk creates your community visions, okay? And so not everybody comes to the hall for the meetings or that sort of stuff, but everybody likes to have an input. So if you can actually get on a one-on-one to get the input coming through, feeding through from a process, then you're going to get far better information flying up the line, get far better flying football, and hopefully you'll get it engaging as well, enduring as well.
Yeah, I support that, except for the certification. I'm sorry, the certification audit one system, not.
I'm not going to disagree with that.
Yeah, no, the last system was awful.
But it's just imperative that it doesn't get weakened, too far down. It's not hard. If you've got a low impact farm, you can have a low impact environment plan, and you can probably build it yourself. And as long as it's visible, you can go there, because there's so much been happening on the ground. The information is not traveling up the funnel as to what's actually happening, and also that our resource, we don't know where our resources are. And I'm talking environmental resources, i.e. wetlands, i.e. biodiversity planting, i.e. new wetlands and constructed wetlands. We're not getting that information. It's not travelling up the funnel, so that people on the higher levels can actually make decisions based on actual numbers rather than based on what they hear and wherever they get their information from, which is not always from a broad perspective. Obviously, the information from the noise, get away from the noise and get to the actual stuff that's happening on the ground. So I think that's really vitally important. And I think, and you can bring in all sorts of stuff. If you use that approach with your farm plans, you're going to get way more fine, because there's all this stuff like there's a lot of high at-risk areas in farming. Soil stacks is one, effluent application and muck spreading and that sort of stuff. There's one, we probably don't want to have a whole lot of regulations that don't work that work there but not there and that. But if you're using your farm plan, you can get it tailored so that it works in your area with your community of interest. So I think it's just, I just worry that the farm planning process may start to get watered down too much.
The scale of the farm plan is really important. I've seen the worst activities happening on livestock blocks because they just don't know any better. And seriously, I've seen cattle fenced into just on the road from us, and really clear that they think that's our place. That sort of stuff is just important, and they need to understand that. And it gives us all a bad name, and it has some
probably where we connect anyways.
But
We got those problems, but yeah. Are you advocating, sorry, for a small scale though?
I'm a small scale. If there is a demand, if there's a risk in that area, depending on what the risks are. If you've got, to be fair, our water is very high quality, so it just causes a whole lot of sediment issues.
But with everything you're looking to do in these earlier questions that you're asking of us, and then with the changes that are proposed to the overall way of paying, unless we are moving to a more enabling across the board, we are going to continue with this current situation where anything substantial, anything that has been well mooted but discussed for a long time, brought to the table will be fine. And so this has to change. And so that's what I'm hopeful for, is that in everything you're asking of us here and in the revised RNA, that a more enabling stance is found that follows through. So I think there has to be much more national direction to regional councils around expectations. If the government wants change, the government has to identify where the change should be to enable us more.
Alan.
One of the major issues we've read with at length in when we were putting together that draft then was the quantity of taps and minimum flows and whatnot. Are there implications around that in here, or is that waiting for this next big
It's waiting for the next big out. So the water storage proposals explicitly say, you know, we're not dealing with the ability to take water here. Allocation is a big outstanding question with the reforms and where the government decides to go in response to the EOG's recommendations there. What I guess the way that we feed into allocation is this is essentially the process for defining environmental limits, as the EOG would put it, and the available what's available to invest in design outcome and productive use, or those are the same things. So this is, I guess, the process for defining what is to be allocated, but the process for allocating is yet to come.
Thanks. Can I ask what the role of the environmental Simon Uptonstein, Commissioner for the Environment, Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, is? Do they just submit on this, or is it again human people pull them together? I really like some of the stuff that comes out of that office and really high level thinking about change, which is brilliant. But they don't seem to be a tool in this process when they could be getting discussion going, and it would be a really good place to be using.
So we meet with them, we talk with them, you know, a similar discussion with this actually, they have quite strong ideas about the future system and what it should look like. So, but they are independent of government, they're watchdog, and so then we can only be as open with them as we can with you. We have to maintain the confidence of ministers. So they're not involved in the decision making.
No.
Or advising.
I just, a role, the thing is we're just one council. Getting a whole lot of people in the same space would be a really good thing to be doing, and that there aren't the tools to do that in this process, which is unfortunate. I mean, you know, we can go and reach out to other, read out other councils' feedback and things like that, but it would be really, this is such a major change. It would be so good to get a place where we could have put up ideas safely and constructively, and that's really hard to set up.
Do you feel because we work with Te Kahika and rely, you know, we find it quite valuable to have Te Kahika as a forum for bringing together local government?
I think you'll find that that's local government staff. It's not necessarily local government. Councillors who, and there is a disconnect with all respect of experience and practicality and understanding that the representatives on the council have to sometimes the staff, and that's not a criticism, it's just the reality of when you live in the stuff. It's a very, irrigation is a very narrow interest group, and very particular.
And we're quite separate regions, I suppose. I mean, we connect quite strongly to South Canterbury, obviously, and we have really strong relationships, but quite different issues to other areas of New Zealand. And when we do get together this regional sector, quite often do talk past each other because we're just totally different. What we're dealing with. The scale of our region is massive as well down here. I don't know. Just
really, absolutely. I mean, I think it's going to be nitrate rules in Canterbury. Absolutely get that. That's a huge issue. Same in Southland. We don't have those same problems. We don't want to get to there to give it that. So we want to backstop. But you know, their top 4 priorities are much easier to identify in some ways than else.
This year is a sort of a final thing. It's just where we're at the moment, with regional councils, we realise there's no pathway forward, but just as a reflection of today, we actually as a council function, I think, pretty well. We all come together, we've got different views, we're all democratically elected, we respect each other, we bring our communities with us. It's a massive region, really, really big, as you know. It's important that we have all our voices and we respect that, but I'm just going to say that when we talk to even people like federated farmers reps around our region, or they're not wanting to centralise, they do want to work with us. They don't actually like the idea of centralising compliance monitoring and enforcement and things. We are willing as a sector though to have a look at whatever works at whatever scale and what's efficient, but actually, you know, we want to work to have change. We want, you know, we're painted as that council at the moment, particularly, that's totally over here, and we're just trying to slam through the previous government stuff. And actually, we do want a system that's far more efficient and effective, and we recognise all the problems that have been going on for many years. In fact, we've brought them up many times. We need to move forward. We really appreciate these types of conversations and the fact that you come into Otago. It's a hard space for us at the moment. We're doing some really good work, I think, in our region. We've got one of the most diverse regions. There's so much opportunity here. Just really want to, I know it's not you guys, it's ministers and relationships, but we're here to help wherever we can. And we need to have these conversations at the type of level where we can get change and we can work together with central government. But yeah, we need to be involved, we do. We shouldn't be excluded, and so thank you for making that happen. It's really important. Yeah, it's a hard space for us at the moment, even for our communities as a result of that, with a lot of uncertainty. And together, if we can just keep this going, it's going to make a big difference. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having us. I mean, Vicky and I and a few others, we've been doing this since 2013, 2014. I have to be honest, this is the first time I've been able to sit down and have this kind of discussion with council laws. And thank you for, you know, your officials' time as well. It's enormously helpful for us.
We're happy to come to you anytime, so.
Yeah.
It's not about time.
We're pretty good at listening. We're pretty good at talking too. We are pretty good at listening to your perspective.
Questions. Was there anything recent for Otago that has still left that you need an answer on?
I think so, team. Is there any, do you have any more burning questions? I think while we've got everyone here. No.
Well, I had something, I think it was UK, that said, well, nitrogen is obviously a problem in Canterbury, but it's not one of our big issues. Yeah, that's it. What do you consider arguable big?
Pest management,
top
and
four.
Pest management, biodiversity, Biosecurity Act is really limiting. It's so hard to change. It is the biggest tool that we've got to make a big change immediately. And that's absolutely has a huge effect on water quality. So that's why I want to see pest management brought into an ICM, and where the modules that you can take into your planning framework and do site-led stuff. The Biosecurity Act. Now, how many years did it take you to change the RBMP last time? It's just too hard, torturous.
Couple of years.
Huge problems on the doing possum control. One place held up. You know, one place stopped them getting in there and doing it. Huge negative effects, hugely positive. So again, look at all of those tools, enable communities to do it, and if they don't, give them us powers to do rules.
Our biggest issue is water allocation, really. I think that's a big one, Kate, but yeah, and we're still waiting for that. And the reason for that is people need certainty. Gary's talked about that, the big infrastructure investments, the banks, we have not transitioned from deemed permits yet because we're in those short consents. So until we do, and we sort that out, that's our big one. And then we've got all sorts, because we're such a diverse region, we've got pockets of everything.
Yeah.
We've got the nitrates and groundwater type issues in the Waitaki, at the very, a little pocket of that, and then we've got, each catchment's so different, and the high alpine, issues of trends in lakes, deteriorating and potentially, we don't even know that, we don't know if it's climate, we don't know what it is, but anyway, alpine lakes all the way through to the intensive areas from Africa. Lloyd's been doing his ICM work in some pretty nasty water quality at times in Lower Cooper.
I think one of the keys with us, in fact, alpine lakes are key for us.
Yeah.
And because it's a slow burn, and we just can't afford to have a slow burn. And because slow burns go unnoticed, and they're so precious, not only as a resource, but to the communities that live and work in resource, but also New Zealand Inc. They're like a postcard really. And I think as Richard says, obviously the upper lakes are different mining areas, so we got different challenges, but probably New Colway is probably one that's consistent across most zones. Colway, like down home, sediment phosphate, and pests is becoming a bigger issue by the day, and as because the landscape's changing with the advent of increased forestry, pigs are becoming a massive issue. So that's all stuff that's in front of us.
You see deer on state highways quite regularly, and pigs, and it's incredible. You didn't used to see them.
One of Gary's neighbours we were on recently said they'd had, you probably know, a mob of 200 deer, that's coming across.
One of our farmers came to picture of 20 odd deer on his front lawn. Yeah.
So the one concept that wasn't in the whole thing for me though was mountains to the sea. And often we try and deal with things at the bottom end when you actually have to deal with them in the right order. And there's nothing in there, which I think is mountains to the sea is a wonderful concept.
And that's why we don't want to have limits down here across the whole area, because they're not painful up here. That makes sense, like your bottom lines. That's why you need to do that, put mountains to sea. So our Great Lakes, we can't afford for them just be average, can we bigger than the storm?
All right. Guys, that's well done. Good. Listen to us and downloading everything out of our head that took us a whole day yesterday, and it took us. So.
We've still got 3 to go.
Thanks everyone who's on the screen listening as well and didn't get a chance to speak at all too much. So really appreciate you being there, and MPI as well. Really important to have both of the ministries there.
So I should say we work as a joint team. We're completely
awesome.
I'd just like to welcome Vanessa to your new role in the on-farm support team. Good to have put a face to a name while we're recording.
Oh, thank you. Yes, well, it's only day 2, so we'll see how I go. But yeah, bringing the 2 things together too, I think has been really helpful. So I'm sure I will be in touch around the water storage and the projects that we've got coming up too. So in a separate conversation.
Yeah, and it's really, we have a really good relationship with all farms, RIC advisors and the local catchment group network as well. So it works together in sync, and it's, and it multiplies the factor going through there. So it's really good. If you need a good model, just look at Otago.
Brilliant. Thanks. Great to hear that.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, team. Bye.
So you're off.